Welcome to the Church with No Walls podcast.
Welcome to this edition of the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Reverend Lindsey Ardrey, who is the Canon Missioner for Reparations and Restitution in the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. So, Lindsey, glad to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And so, Lindsey, I've known Lindsey since college.
That's
me
right.
and Lindsey also are birthday twins. We share the same birthday. So Lindsey's she's like really cool in my book for those two reasons. So, well, many reasons, but those two in particular. So I'm glad to have you on the podcast. I know you've been doing some traveling, so I'm glad that you're back safe and you're able to take a little time with me. So Lindsey, we'll just jump in a little bit and kind of just start talking a little bit about your experience with media and technology and live streaming and such pre-pandemic. What did that look like as far as, did you guys use a lot of social media, live streaming of services or anything like that? What did that look like?
Yeah, so in the Episcopal Church, we didn't, it wasn't our default.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that. We kind of used technology sparingly, lightly. A number of our bigger churches, now they had already had equipment and camera and things like that already set up, and they were kind of poised to live stream services. But many of our medium to smaller sized churches, it just wasn't part of their routine or their traditions. And, I think some of that has to do with size, where a church is located. But I do think some of it is intrinsic in, sort of our practices and our tradition. We do a whole lot of standing and sitting and kneeling throughout the service. Right. Every Sunday, we walk up to the altar railing and we kneel and we take communion. And so, in that way, I think it's kind of a bodily thing. And so, technology or streaming or things like that are not typically things that we incorporated. And I will say it's few and far between where you'll go to Episcopal churches and see big screens or, the words of worship right there for you. And the pandemic did start to shift that.
And so you mentioned something which I thought was interesting. And I've talked to other preachers and pastors and religious leaders of other denominations, because there is a lot of ritual, a lot of things that you do. Like you said, there's a lot of standing, sitting, there's a lot of movement. I would imagine that, obviously maybe for the pandemic, and we'll kind of get into that some of that was altered or changed, but that's a lot for a camera crew, depending on, especially if you're one of the smaller to mid-sized churches, to have to keep up with and to have to make it feel like, for somebody who's watching it at home or somewhere else, to make them feel like they're in the same space, because you're doing so many different things throughout the course of a service. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. 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 That's right. And right, it's easier financially, it's easier in human capital to be able to pull that off in a bigger church. And I have been in a medium-sized church who, they've gotten the cameras, but it takes a whole crew, right? Because they're syncing up the microphones, they're making sure it's coming through the entire sound system, and right, it's a whole. It's a whole thing. It's a whole new way of trying to live into it, and I think there's something that, like, at the core of it too, wanting to be accessible to folks, and also um and also kind of staying simple and staying true to what it means to being Christian. you know um Jesus certainly didn't have all of these gadgets. And that's a little bit unfair. Right?
We didn't
Because he
need
was
it.
also right. um and um yeah, how do we do worship and be accessible and inclusive, and still yeah, be true to our call.
So walk me through kind of when the pandemic hit, what that looked like, because, obviously everybody thought initially this would be a couple weeks, maybe a month or so, everything will start to clear up. But once it started really kind of hunkering down and people started having to realize, okay, we're gonna have to make some changes in order to survive, in order to be able to still get the word out. What did that look like for the Episcopal Church? How did you guys kind of navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my perspective is somewhat unique because I was in seminary at the time of the pandemic. So I spent a year and a half in in blissful ignorance of what was about to come, and then another year and a half right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. And so I was able to have a little bit of distance from what churches were going through, the demand that was on a lot of clergy folk and taking care of people, and trying to discern what to do, how to continue worshiping when you can't be together. And so in seminary, because we still had our own worship services that we were doing 3 times a day. And so I know the seminary and the church that I was serving in, and this is all in Austin, Texas, but both started relying heavily on Zoom. I know there were so many funny memes going around social media at the time with the Scooby Doo memes, where they do the big
Yeah, yeah.
reveal and
Pull
they
the
take
mask
off
off.
the mask. Yeah, and it was Zoom, right? Zoom is behind the pandemic, because everybody sort of jumped on Zoom. Like, we can't be in person. Nobody was even really going into the sanctuaries. Um, and so, right, Zoom was the place where folks were gathering for Sunday services, but also Bible studies. And I know a lot of churches and clergy folk were offering just, hey, we know that this week is hard. We're gonna jump on a Zoom at 2 o'clock on Thursday. Come and just be together. I will say also, um, churches, clergy people mostly got really um, intimate with recording things. And so while some folks did worship service live on Zoom, other churches decided to record services. And so particularly when we were a month or so into it and realized, like you said, oh, this is going to be a thing. We're going to be in this for the long haul. And so, some priests would go to the church, set up a camera, set up their phone with the tripod, and record parts of the service, record their sermon, record the readings, and they would post it online, and have folks able to view it. And so they would have more like viewing parties on Facebook, right? So they have the packaged up service, and got really good at having people record themselves reading the scripture and putting that in there, having recording the pianist or the organist doing their thing. And so you kind of saw a blend of that happening.
So as they got kind of used to it, did you guys kind of just think, okay, this may be the way we're going to be forever, so we're just going to, you kind of leaned into it, but was there ever a thought of what is this going to look like once we get out of it, or we're just going to kind of just long haul it this way and we'll make adjustments as we go?
I think there was always the conversation about how is this going to change how we look at worship, how we gather together. I don't remember hearing of or being part of any conversation about this is what we are all, or how it's always going to be. I think folks knew that, now that we've introduced, right, these new ways of worshiping, of being together, of having to be innovative, of having to do all of that, right? When this is all over, because I think we were all hopeful that it would indeed one day be over. But when this is all over, right, what are we going to keep, and what have we been learning through the process? What do we keep? What didn't work so great? And so, like, really taking that as an iterative process.
And then how did the membership react? How did those who were having to adjust? Obviously, you guys were adjusting as clergy, but how did the members adjust? Was it how did you see them adjust?
Yeah. I saw a range of things. I know on a personal level, the opening of that, right? When you put something on social media, then you're not just bound to, oh, you have to get here. You have to get up on a Sunday morning after you've gotten up every day in the week.
Yeah.
And so you're opening it up to the world. Personally, I was out in Austin in seminary. My parents are in Kentucky, and so they were able to join the services. They were able to join our adult Sunday school classes online, and they got to know my community that I was serving in ways that they wouldn't have been before. And I think what I witnessed in the church that I was serving in Austin at that time is the church was already prided themselves on practicing radical hospitality. And they really did that. They did that well. It's what drew me into the church. And I think this allowed them to broaden that. And so within that church, they were really enthusiastic, and so I think they embraced it. Their numbers didn't falter too much when they moved to that. But I know it was a widespread issue in a lot of churches, that as time went on and people kind of got used to it, right? Giving kind of dropped off. Folks weren't giving as much because they weren't going, right? It's the routine when the plate gets passed, right? Then that's your reminder. But if you're kind of sitting at home, outside of that first threat of the pandemic, right? Because I think initially people were giving, people were online, but folks got kind of used to it. And so that was kind of an issue. So I think you saw the spectrum of that, but I think by and large, the numbers went down, and today churches are still trying to recover that, recover those numbers, at least in our denomination.
And so, I agree with you. I think, even the other clergy I've talked to, they're all kind of figuring out the same thing, because some of them have not resigned, but they've made the understanding that, hey, what we have now, who's physically returned to us, are probably what we're going to have, and now we have this theoretical world that we're now a part of. And you said something which I liked. You talked about how, your parents were now able to be a part of the services, and the community that you were part of in Texas, they were able to have access to that and kind of be able to worship and such with you and your church. Where did you start to see people come back almost immediately after the pandemic, after things kind of lifted, or was it a slow crawl? Where are you guys at now with it?
Yeah, I think it was more of a slow crawl, right? You saw this in all of the different institutions and sectors. Some people were, over social distancing by the time it started. And so they were ready to jump in. When are we going to be in person? When are we going to do this? And, a lot of people got impatient, and they were like, well, the church over there, they're already going in person. And so, what I witnessed was a lot of churches doing some deep wrestling with and walking alongside of, right, all of the people in the congregation who were living with these different comfortabilities, right? Even if it was just a preference. You had people who just had preferences, but then you also had people who were immunocompromised. You have older individuals, and right, watching churches kind of discern, when are we going to go back into person? What decisions are we going to make, and how are we going to be making those decisions? And so that was a real negotiation. And then for us too, because we have, the little communion packets that come pre-made.
Yeah.
I would say for the most part, Episcopalians aren't fans of that, right? We like our chalice, we like our bread, we want to dip it, or we want to drink
Yeah.
from the cup. And so, some churches got real fancy or real creative about how to do that without all of that. And then some people just didn't trust it. And so, when we that was also a consideration for some folks about their comfortability, or when they were going to be coming back in, right? Are we using the common cup? Can you pour it in these individual cups? And so that was also a thing that folks are having to negotiate. And so, yeah, now I think I think almost as recently as last year, I was filling in some churches when I first got here. Maybe it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. But right, the social distancing signs are still up, and in some congregations they said, the population of our churches is folks 60 and older. So we're gonna all come together. but we're all gonna mask, or we're gonna mask in certain situations. And so, you really saw that trepidation and just trying to care for and tend to people in that.
And so now we're, I guess, maybe 2.5 years removed from the pandemic, and I mean, prayers to God, another pandemic does not come, or anything like that. Um,
Not soon.
not anytime soon, not anytime in our lifetimes. Let's pray. Where do you guys continue to use social media and live streaming? Have you kind of scaled back from it in favor of the more traditional in-house worshiping like you did pre-pandemic?
Yeah, so I think it was one of those things that was introduced, and kind of once you introduce it, you can't get rid of it. And I think some folks have found it useful in a way to evangelize, a way to broaden their reach to folks. Um, yeah, I think it's I think it's a necessary at this point. And I will say, many of our churches got various grants and money from our larger church within our nationally and internationally, and governmental things, right? So a lot of churches were able to get equipment and get supplies to do that. And so they now have it. And so I think a lot of churches that have the capacity to do so are continuing to have some kind of presence. Some of them are more capable of streaming. I know almost as much as they can, most churches are, say, at least posting, right, the sermon from a service, whether that's audio or visual. Um, so yeah, I think it was introduced, and now folks are kind of teasing out, well, how can we use this to uplift the gospels and be the disciples that we're being called to be.
And you kind of touched on this in that last answer, but there was no mandate from the national or international saying, "Hey, this is what we want you to do. Here's how much you can use, or in what ways to use it." There was no, I take it, there was no real mandate. It was kind of, you guys kind of had autonomy in how you structured your individual churches.
Yes, especially in terms of technology. I will say, so just a little note on the structure of the Episcopal Church. The structure of the Episcopal Church um, mirrors in many ways how our government is set up, and that's by design. Many of the founding folks were Episcopalian, and so we have, right, our broader church, our big church, and then we have dioceses, right, that make up the larger church, and the dioceses govern themselves, and each church within a diocese, and a diocese is, right, roughly like a regional area. And so all of the churches, they are their own autonomous bodies that collectively kind of get together, collaborate, and are governed within a diocese. And so, you know, as is with our states, right? Many states are doing their own thing and they have these laws, and those laws, well, it looks different in another state. And it was the same between dioceses. And so dioceses, which are led by a bishop, they had their own autonomy to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I'd say the mandates per se were more centered around when can you worship again? When can you worship in person again? When are we going back into the churches? How can you offer communion? But when it came to technology, it was more like, how can we support you? What things can we do to make sure that you and your people are staying in contact? How can we think creatively with you? Can we help you write the grants to get you a Zoom account, light rings, whatever, cameras? How can we help you do that? Because that is the way that we are going to be together in this time period. So no mandates, mostly just support.
Great. So what do you think in terms of, and some people will say that by whether you use a little or a lot of social media or live streaming to put the message out there, some people will say that goes against God. It's being more worldly because you're using worldly means in order to engage people. And some people will say, well, now it's a competition because you're trying to get people to watch your service or trying to engage with you versus that one. So they will find reasons or ways to say that it is not of God, it's not of the Bible. So as a clergy, what do you say to that? Is this something that is actually beneficial to religion and to those trying to seek it, or could it be something that is actually I don't know if I want to say hindrance, but something that could be perceived as a negativity towards true worship and religion?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of, goes back to my original, Jesus didn't have, all of
Yeah.
these things, which is a bit, not quite a fair assessment. I will say what I believe and what I know of the Christian tradition and of the Bible is that the world changes and it shifts and it evolves, and the witness that I see in the Bible is that is God showing up to people who are trying to figure it out, who are trying to live in the world, who are trying to be faithful to each other and are trying to be faithful to their God, to the God of their ancestors, and that God moves within change. And I think when we talk about all of these different changes and people are questioning that, my first instinct is to ask folks, what is it that you are afraid of? And typically it's right. It's this fear of change. It's this fear of instability. It's a fear of what you could potentially lose. And my answer is that, thank goodness God is so much more abundant, so much more expansive and vast than any of that. Is God scared of technology? I'm pretty sure God is not. I hope God is not. And it's more on us and how we are using those tools. Are we actually using it to uplift our communities? Are we using it in ways that's bringing folks closer to God, right? Because you can use any kind of tool to edify yourself, to lift up individuality or tear folks down, right? It's not just technology.
Right.
And so, right, that's our task. Are we using the tools that are coming into our lives responsibly?
Absolutely. So looking at that, and I've always felt like it's a platform. It's a platform to give people um who can't get to church, who can't physically get there, or kind of like they're peeking their head through the door. They kind of want to see about, maybe I want to see if this is for me, without having to open the door wide open, because a lot of people won't walk into a church. They feel like they'd be ashamed, or they'd be called out, or somebody would look at them funny. But I turn on somebody's service, and I peek in. I like the vibe of the church. I like what's being said. It might inspire me to go to that church if within physical distance. And if I'm not, I could still reach out to that church and follow it and its teachings from whatever social media or live streaming equipment I have. So I feel like it kind of tends to give those who necessarily wouldn't a place to kind of walk in quietly and slowly. Like, when you walk into church and, you're late, and you're afraid that everybody's gonna turn around and look at you. This way you don't have to worry about that, because you're not walking in late. Nobody's gonna know if you're there, but hopefully it gives you something. But with that being said, how do you, now that we're kind of back into this, people are back in the church, but you've also got the online version. So now we're more of a hybrid model. How do you intentionally minister to those people who are online, while not forgetting about the people who are physically in the sanctuaries? Because I know that seems like that would be harder, because you don't want to shortchange the online folks, because you want them to multiply and to stay, but you don't want to turn the people off who are sitting there and like, oh, well, you're not even thinking about me sitting here physically. You're too busy looking at the camera and talking to the people out there that are theoretical. So what does that look like for you all?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely a balance. It's definitely a balance. I don't know the numbers on this, but I imagine that, at least in the churches that I've been in, I've experienced that most of the people who are joining online have some kind of connection to the church already. And so, as I've been in churches, served on a Sunday, kind of in substitute roles. It's been more of a focusing on the folks who are right there in front of you, and at the right moments, right, during announcements or when you're doing specific prayers, right, then you're inviting the folks in, and you're saying, oh, I invite you to say your prayers out loud. And if you're at home, write them in the chat box. Or if you're joining us from your living room, consider coming in, or reach out and we can go out for coffee. I think for most folks, it's trying to um, make that transition of folks who are joining online to come in person, and these would be the folks who are just joining in. Oh, I want to go to church, but they have specific trauma related around going to churches. I don't trust going in, so let me view it. Or someone who's new to the area. I don't actually want to go to 20 different churches in person, right? Let me drop in. Or right, work schedules. There are all kinds of different ways that or yeah, ways that folks need to have online things, at least initially. But I do think kind of the goal is let's turn that into an actual relationship. Let's turn that into um, some kind of in person. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to come to Sunday services, but can you plug in when we're going to feed the college students, when we're going to go pack up food for homeless, right? How can you turn that into ways of participation that are less distant than just a one-way viewing on a computer screen.
Absolutely. And so I know my church, because of the hybrid model and because we have people who are watching from wherever, we have instituted where you can become a member of the church and still be virtual. You know, you can be added to the roster. We've had a couple of people that have been baptized that live in another state, but they are now considered full-fledged members of our church. I was curious, is that something you all have explored? Is that something you guys are doing, or how would that work? Would somebody be able to fully join your church, even though they may live in Texas, or they may live, well, you're in Texas, but they may live in Sacramento, California, or Bristol, Connecticut?
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't know. I don't know the full answer to that. I think churches are probably exploring that on an individual basis, but I would imagine that they are open to that. And if I can be realistic and crass a little bit, right? Membership often comes with pledges.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
often comes with money. So I don't know too many churches who would say, no, don't send your check because you're 5 states away.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? You can come at Easter, that's fine, or not. We
yeah.
will take that check. Right. That's a little bit more on the crass side,
But it's
but
honest. It's honest.
yeah.
There is a
We'll
business
take
within
it.
church.
It is, right? And you want to continue thriving and doing your ministry and being able to allow your parish administrator to have health insurance or buy groceries at least,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
That's real. That's real. And there is within church, there is a business and there's a business model. And if you're getting somebody who lives 5 states away, but they're putting $1,000 in a month, I mean, they may be happy just doing that because they like your ministry, but they may want to be a part of it. They may want to feel like, hey, I want to contribute, but not just as a contributor. I want to be a member of
That's right.
your spiritual body, and that from there I will continue to give. If I can, if I do
Mhm.
trek over to where you're at, I will come visit and I will be a part of an in-person service, but there's a real likelihood I may never get over there, but I still want to be a part of it. So yeah, no, I think, it may sound crass, but there is a business component to it. There is as well as a religious component to it that I don't think sometimes people want to necessarily talk about because it doesn't sound spiritual, but
Right. It doesn't sound spiritual. And I tried to remind people, right? God incarnated God's self in the form of Jesus, right? So God came down, lived fully human, lived this human life. And in the witness of Jesus, we saw that Jesus was caring for the things that people needed to care for. They needed to eat,
yep,
right? They needed companionship. They needed all of these. They needed to tend to their bodies, and they had to tend to what it meant to live in a society. Right. And again, as with anything, you can go too far into it, and you can value those things higher than maybe you should. But at its core, right? We want to care for people. We want to tend to them, and as much as we don't like it, folks need money to exist, to live.
Right. So now as we're looking, let's say we're looking 25 to 50 years in the future. And obviously we could probably look farther, but I doubt either one of us are going to be around at that point. So we'll say a 25 to 50-year window. We'll do that. Do you think that we will have brick and mortar church buildings, the physical buildings we have will start to go away and we will become a more online church service, church driven society? Or do you think that they will still be there and that we'll still have and that will still be the main way of worshiping for people?
I don't know. We're not in an era where folks feel obligated or that they need church in the ways that they needed it before. And so folks are kind of opting in, picking and choosing and doing what they want to do. I am definitely an advocate for being in a space with folks, feeling people's energy. I think that you become more passionate when you're able to, feel people's emotions, and so I think that is very important. But as our society shifts, continues to shift and change, um, like people's involvement in church and their reasons for going to church continue to change. I think our numbers will continue to kind of um, decrease. I think they'll decrease, but I don't think people are going to want those intimate connections less. I actually think that's going to increase. Um, the world, things are getting really difficult
Yeah, yeah,
out
say the least.
there, out there in the world. And I think we're going to come to a crisis moment where people are going to want to be close to one another. And so we may not have, um, we may not be able to fill all of the churches to capacity again. But our presiding bishop, he has kind of made this. I want to say prophecy. That feels a little dramatic, but he's kind of prophesied that we might go back to the early days of Christianity, where folks are meeting in people's houses. Right. And many churches do this, right?
Yeah,
They have
yeah.
belong groups and things like that. But no, actually having service around a dinner table. And I know within our church, we see particularly church plants like doing that. We don't need a building or right. We rent out this storefront, and every Sunday we come together, we cook a meal, and we have church with 20 or 30 of us gathered around a really long table. And so that might be more of the shape of it, and how that figures into um, using technology and media. I think that will continue to be a thing, but I think it'll be, more so for the larger churches. Um, yeah, 20, 30 years from now. I think it'll be a useful tool to help folks to just expand, be a little bit more nimble. Um, yeah, those are my two cents on that. But also, I have a hat that says analog. I still write out my calendar. So that's my bend. I think as long as this technology and social media is a way that folks are finding community and are coming together, I think it'll definitely continue to be in use and of use to folks.
So let me last question for you, and this is one I've started thinking about more. Somebody mentioned it to me. I was like, I didn't even think about this until now. But obviously, we got the technology to live stream and social media like that. But the biggest technology that is on the rise, I guess it's been here for years, but it's really starting to take over now, is AI. So artificial intelligence in the church setting.
Mm.
Where do you see that fitting in over the course of the next couple of decades? Does that become, because I can, in my head, I could see people tuning into AI pastors or AI services and completely replacing, well, not completely replacing, but in some ways replacing or replicating what we do as humans in a church
Mm.
setting. So what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on what AI might look like incorporated into our churches?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I'll start by saying I don't know that I have expansive enough knowledge of all of the things that AI can do. I'm still on the first tier of, just kind of typing in things in the AI thing, boxing it, helping me, kind of think through things. I think like on a theological level, right? I think it'll be good for folks to like get information, have easier access where they once may have needed to go to a priest for knowledge, right? Kind of like the how Google turned into, or doctors end up saying, "Oh, you went to Dr. Google, didn't you?" Um,
Yeah,
right. So I think in that way, folks will be able to kind of take the mediator out of that, which has its pros and its cons. Um, but I really do think that like when you come down to it, um, people need each other, and I don't think we can go on a whole tangent about robots and everything like that. And
yeah,
sure, robots can provide companionship no matter if they get smart enough, and the artificial intelligence is, we can go into that. And I just don't know at this moment what can replicate, another body, another hand holding another someone else's hand, right? I can't You can't replicate your pastor or your church friend coming to see you in the hospital. Um, those are the things that I think are going to stay and just can't be taken over.
absolutely. Good thoughts. And like I said, none of us really know where exactly it's going. So at this point, it's speculative. We can assume, but
Right.
yeah, I guess we will find out as time goes along. But we've been talking with Reverend Lindsey Ardrey, who is the Canon Missioner for Reparations and Restitutions in the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. Lindsey, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. This was fun, and yeah, just grateful for the conversation and being invited.
Absolutely. So that's the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Take care and be blessed.